Hello again, Mac Engel, Angle Podcast. Summer is rapidly winding down. This is one of the differences I noticed when I've gotten older. The summer is really different because when you're a kid, the summer cannot last long enough. If the summer was 18 months, it was too short. If you're an adult with the kid, you do reach a point where you're like, all right, let's wrap this up. Summer needs to get done. Need to go back to school. Apparently that's where I am. So I want to share this story before I introduce my guest for this episode. This happened to me this week, and this goes to something that I have talked about with anybody who criticizes media, or specifically as it relates to social media, Twitter mostly, some Facebook, Instagram, but social media in general, which is if you're going to say something about somebody, would you say it to their face? That's a very hard standard to meet because now more than ever, thanks to social media and the veil of anonymity, we'll say anything about anybody that we would never say to their face. I've certainly been guilty of this. And as I got older, I decided, no, I'm not going to say this unless I would say it to the guy's face or the woman's face. So for 4 years, Tom Herman was the head coach at the University of Texas, football coach. And he had a decent run there. There was always kind of noise about Tom Herman. And he was fired after the 2020 season. He was fired in January of 2021 under very bizarre and unusual circumstances. So when he was the head coach at the University of Texas, he carried himself in a unique way. I think he was kind of arrogant. And I think he kind of ruffled some feathers quite unintentionally, but he did it. So when I would write about Tom Herman, I would call him Tommy Boy. Now, why I did it, I don't even know. I remember writing the column for the very first time, and it just hit me, Tommy Boy, based on the character that Chris Farley played in a movie by the same title, Tommy Boy, and it just stuck. I don't even know why. But I'm sitting there and I'm humoring myself and I think I'm really funny and for some reason it just stuck. But as a criticism of me, I never said this to his face. When I did interview him, it was over a Zoom. He probably wouldn't even remember it. So my point is, a lot of the times, the criticism that I had of Tom Herman during his run as the head coach of the University of Texas, I never said that to his face. No, I wrote it, and it's my name on it. And as a result, I have to own that. Those are my words. That's my name on it. Not anybody else's fault. That's my fault, and I own all of them, good or bad. So Tom Herman was fired in January of 2001. Late last year, he was hired as the head football coach at Florida Atlantic University. This week, American Athletic Conference held its football media days at the Lowe's Hotel at Texas Live in Arlington. So I thought to myself, it's 20 minutes down the road. I should go introduce myself and give him a chance to dog cuss me. Give him a chance to speak his mind. Give him a chance to say whatever he wants to my face, because I've earned it. And while I look back and some of my criticism and critiquing of his coaching tenure was valid, what was wrong was I never gave him the chance to look at me in the eye and say what he needed to say to me. So I thought to myself, I owe it to this guy at least to go introduce myself and do this, and let's just see how it goes. Now, to do that can be a little unnerving. I don't care how much older you get, although it does get easier as you get older. But to do something like that is awkward and uncomfortable. But like the lesson always is, if you get a little bit out of your comfort zone, if you feel a little bit awkward, there is going to be some growth there. That's a cliche, but there is truth to it. So at the end of his press conference, he goes to a different room, and there's me, one other guy to my left, and another reporter to my right. And I introduce myself. He says, yeah, I know you. I've met you. And I'm thinking to myself, he's never met me. He might know me, but he hadn't met me. So it's becoming clearly obvious as we have a give and take that he's well aware of who I am, and specifically my criticisms of him in the past. And as this interview is getting to wrap up with this other reporter, Tom looks at me and says, hey, would you do me a favor? I want to talk to you off the record here when this is over. I said, sure. So we go sit down at a table, Tom Herman and I, and we proceed to talk for about 25 minutes, all off the record. He didn't hit me, he didn't punch me, he didn't dog cuss me. Now the contents of that conversation, per his request, will remain private. I will say this, if you give that person a chance to look you in the eye and to talk to them face to face, what you are going to say about them is very likely going to change, as it should. But in this day and age, thanks to the internet and its anonymity, perceived anonymity, it's so easy to just basically do whomever you want. Whereas if that person was sitting right in front of you, you would never do that. This leads me to one other story that I'll share because it applies to the same thing. 2016 or 2017, I can't remember the year exactly, University of Oklahoma was having a great year and its star quarterback was Baker Mayfield. In the Big 12 championship game, Oklahoma is destroying TCU. Now at the time I was tasked to write 2 columns based off the end of that game. The game is virtually over by the middle of the third quarter. I'm like, well, what am I going to write? What am I going to write? What am I going to say that I haven't already written before? And I'm like, oh, I got it. Baker Mayfield's going to win the Heisman, and Baker Mayfield's going to be a bust of an NFL draft pick. So I write it. Don't think saying a quarterback who won the Heisman Trophy will be a bust in the NFL is not complicated math. All you have to do is look at the history of them to know most of them don't work out for whatever reason. Now at the time, Baker Mayfield had already won the Heisman Trophy, so I was like, okay, this is easy pickings. I can write that Baker Mayfield will be a bust. So after the game, it publishes and it goes viral. Oklahoma fans get it. They call me a bunch of names. All these people telling me I suck. And I notice that Baker Mayfield has seen it because he liked it. And I'm like, oh man, he's seen this. And I get a whole bunch of emails and they're like, and one of the guy, whoever wrote me, I don't know, he says, you would never say that to his face. I love a good challenge. So one of the awards that Baker Mayfield won that season, and what was a tremendous year, was the Davey O'Brien Award. The Davey O'Brien Award ceremony is held every year in downtown Fort Worth. And as part of the list of activities for the player that day, he meets with the media one-on-one. It's very, very hard to get these players one-on-one or in a very tight setting the more popular they get. But this was an exception. I was like, you know what? I got an idea. This will work. So there's like 4 of us around Baker Mayfield. He looks great. He's in a tuxedo. It's a very exciting thing for him to be there that day. And he's answering all these questions. There was about 3 or 4 reporters. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got to wait to the very end to ask this question. Because if I do it at the top, it could ruin it for everybody else. So if you're going to ask something like this, when I'm getting ready to ask him, wait to the end, be political about it, and be respectful. So I introduced the question to Baker Mayfield. And there's one detail about this I don't think I've ever admitted. I've told this story a handful of times. I was really nervous. Even though I'm like twice Baker's age, but I'm nervous. Because this is the thing that I'm going to say to his face that most people are not going to do. And I said, I'm paraphrasing here, I said, Baker, how do you deal with this kind of commentary? I said, after TCU, you guys beat TCU in the Big 12 title game, I wrote, you're going to be an NFL bust. I'm the guy. And I know you saw it because you liked it on social media. I'm that guy. And I'm basically giving him the platform to dog cuss me. Now, he didn't do it. Whatever you want to say about Baker Mayfield, how he handles himself in public in those settings sometimes can be very, very savvy, almost political. He can be very good at it. And how he handled himself in that situation was really good. He didn't like me, and he tried to put me in my place. And by putting me in my place, I mean he's basically saying, guys like you make money off me, and that's how you do your jobs, and I'm rich and famous, and you're not. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. He's not wrong. So I went up to him afterwards and I shook his hand. I said, "Thanks a lot. You handled that great. I really appreciate it." Unfortunately for Baker Mayfield, now I want to be real clear about this. I don't wish Baker Mayfield to fail. It would be nice to see. It would have been nice to see him have a good NFL career and give it middle finger to me. It hasn't worked out. He's with his fourth team now, I think, in 6 years, and he'll be the starter in Tampa. And Tampa's not very good. And picking a guy to not succeed or thrive as an NFL starting quarterback is really easy money because most of them don't. The point about this is what I did in those situations, as I'm patting myself on the back, is not comfortable. It's not hard. But there is some growth there if you can force yourself to hold yourself to that standard, whether it's in a private conversation or on social media, anywhere else, which is, would I say what I'm about to say to their face? Again, it's a really tough standard to meet. But if you do, like I did with Tom Herman this week, there's a tremendous opportunity to get some real growth. Or you might get punched in the face. My guest for this episode is a wonderful guest. Her name is Tracy Walder. She's a graduate of USC who went straight from college to work for the CIA. It sounds a lot like the Jennifer Garner hit TV show as Agent Briscoe in the ABC show Alias. I don't think Tracy's life worked out like Alias, but it doesn't matter. She worked for the CIA for 5 years as a covert operative in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. That sounds fascinating. She assumed aliases, speaking of Jennifer Garner, went so far as to hide in the trunks of cars on her way to debrief terrorists at black sites. She then eventually went to work for the FBI, where her assignment was Chinese counterintelligence operations. This all sounds way above my pay grade. Tracy has also done a TED Talk and is a sought-after public speaker for the World Affairs Council. She's also a regular on political TV talk shows as well. She's the author of a book called The Unexpected Spy, which has been optioned to turn into either a TV series or a feature-length film. Please welcome Tracy Walder. You worked in the intelligence community for a number of years. And obviously your story, which you wrote about in the book, is fairly well known, I think. So you can say definitively there are some popular perceptions that we as Americans have about the intelligence community that are completely wrong. What are some of those perceptions that we think of about the intelligence community that are just 180-degree opposite from reality?
I mean, my personal favorite is always Criminal Minds, that were like flying around on Cessnas, things like that.
And, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
No.
It's disappointing.
Definitely not. Let's see. That CIA is, sometimes they portray CIA as a law enforcement agency. It's not, obviously, which is, definitely problematic. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the two biggest misconceptions.
You said the CIA is obviously not an enforcement agency.
Right.
It's problematic. Why is that problematic?
Well, because people expect that their job is different than what it is, right? And then have, this public expectation of what they're supposed to be doing. But the CIA cannot bring, charges against someone. They can't arrest someone. They can't investigate people on American soil. It's not their job. They simply collect intelligence. And so then when people get mad that they haven't caught this person, well, that's not what the CIA does, right? And so then it looks like a failure on that agency, but it's not. It's just that people have perhaps a misperception of what they do.
Okay, so for those of us who are still brave enough to consume the news on the internet or television, and we're scared about everything 24/7, about everything from the food in our pantry to foreign countries that want to kill the West, great Satan, America. Tracy, should we be afraid of foreign threats, or is a lot of this just hot air?
Yes and no. Look, I worked at the CIA during probably the most tenuous time, one of the more tenuous times, in history. And same with the FBI. But I think there's always going to be threats, right? Like there's always going to be since the beginning of time, right? There has always been threats. I always think that vigilance is good. I've always felt that way, whether, before the CIA, after the CIA and FBI, I've always felt vigilance is a good thing. Like, I don't think it's a good idea to be walking around late at night with your nose in your phone and not looking around. I just think that's like a common thing we should do.
Mhm.
But in my opinion, I do think sometimes the news is solely focused on the negative, and then that becomes people's realistic perceptions of what's going on in the world. And yeah, there's some bad stuff going on in the world. No one questions that, but it's not all bad. There's some good stuff going on too.
So you wrote The Unexpected Spy. By the way, it's a phenomenal title. It's obviously about your career. It's really unique. You go from a college student at USC, you're a sorority girl, and you're working for the CIA and eventually the FBI. And you touched on something a little bit earlier, which is the CIA is not a law enforcement agency. The FBI is. Can you explain to me, just the idiot layperson, the core fundamental differences between the CIA and the FBI?
Sure, and you're not idiot lay people. That's just normal. I wouldn't expect people to necessarily know the CIA is an overseas intelligence collection organization. They collect that intelligence, monitor it for threats, collect intelligence from various different avenues, signals, electronic communications, people. They take that, monitor the threats, and then advise the executive branch what they should be doing in terms of national security. That's it. That's it. The FBI operates, mostly in the United States, protect Americans and American interests, but it is to enforce the Constitution and enforce laws. So their job is to collect evidence, to conduct an investigation, and ultimately hold someone or some entity accountable for a crime. That's it. That's really the difference.
These are pretty big differences. I want to go back to 9/11. And obviously I was alive when that happened. It's a terrible time in American history. I'm not saying anything new there. It's more than 20 years ago. Memories are short. People forget things. They forget mistakes that were made. And I remember the biggest takeaway I had from the criticism of America's intelligence community at the time was that what led to al-Qaeda's ability to successfully attack the United States was that our intelligence community had become more reliant on technology than people, than boots on the ground. True or false?
I disagree with that. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I feel that what the 9/11 Commission ultimately found, just obviously being a part of it, was communication was the problem. Interagency communication was the issue. The FBI wasn't passing names to CIA, and CIA wasn't willing to pass names to the FBI. And as a result, some of these hijackers were able to slip into the country unnoticed, and they were on watch lists, but these agencies weren't talking to each other. And that was the biggest problem. And so the 9/11 Commission set up Department of Homeland Security, set up Joint Terrorism task forces, and created outbuildings, where these entities would work together. So that's what their finding ultimately was, in terms of blame, I guess, for 9/11.
Do you think those agencies have corrected that problem? Because I've heard that consistently over the years as cooperation within those agencies, not just those, a lot of them, there are holes there. Do you think they filled them?
No, I don't.
That's terrible. Why do you say that?
So the reason I say that is because, obviously I worked at CIA before, during, and then after September 11th, and then I transitioned to the FBI. And what was so fascinating to me was when I was at the FBI, people hated that I came from the CIA. They were constantly making fun of me for it, constantly putting down the CIA, and constantly not willing to work with them. And this is after 9/11. This is pretty shortly after 9/11, less than 5 years after 9/11. And so I don't think that it's fixed itself, because I would have thought particularly in the time period right after,
Mhm.
that we would have seen a correcting of this behavior, but we haven't.
So Tracy, tell me why people who work, field agents, CIA operatives, or whatever, why they're the butt of a joke, or why they are looked down upon in America, within America's intelligence community, because that doesn't add up to me.
Are you referring back to like the issues regarding like currently with Congress and those kinds of things?
No, I'm referring to when you did what you just mentioned about
Got it.
you when you went to the FBI from the CIA, and they kind of thumbed it. Well, from what you're saying, is they kind of thumbed their nose up at you because of your background.
Well, and
CIA.
it's probably vice versa too, to be honest with you. But obviously, I didn't come from the reverse, so I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with ego. I really do think that that's the bottom line. What would happen was, so at FBI, again, it is an investigatory arm, right? They are investigating and bringing charges against someone. You do not need, in some cases, a top secret clearance or what's called an SCI clearance. Most FBI agents at the time do not have SCI clearances. There's no reason to. They just don't need them. Having a higher clearance doesn't make you a better person or a higher level. It's just what you need access to do your job. At CIA, we handle human assets. Therefore, you need an SCI clearance. And what would happen is CIA couldn't pass information that was SCI to FBI, and FBI would view that as some kind of like personal affront to them and get really crabby about it. And as a result, feel that they were being like taunted in some weird way by the CIA, which I don't know. I don't consider myself a very egotistical person, so I don't understand that. It boggles my mind. I literally don't get it. Like, I mean, at CIA, you have some security clearances your friends have, and you don't have some security clearances your friends have. It doesn't bother me. I genuinely don't care. It's whatever I need to like get my job. That's what became the issue.
So, from what you're
Which is
describing, this sounds like if you had a piece of information that you thought was valuable, or any of your colleagues at the CIA, and they want to call the FBI to give somebody a heads up, let's say his name is Bill, would Bill often take the attitude, I don't need your help, I already know that?
no, I
Something
think
else.
so. I think what started, there's a really good documentary, on leading up to 9/11 and information sharing. And there was these two individuals, Doug Miller and Mark Rossini, who were actually detailed to my office at CIA. Really, really great guys. I got to know Mark really well. And he had an SCI. Both of them had SCI clearances because they're working in our offices, obviously. And they had the names of some of the terrorists, but those names were acquired by human intelligence SCI means. And so they actually couldn't pass those to the FBI because of that. And if they did, they'd be let out in handcuffs, right? So their hands are tied, right? And then, so I think it's, bad on CIA's front too. It's not just a slam on the FBI. I think the whole thing is problematic.
So this is the part that drives me kind of crazy, because I've heard this not just from you, but from other people, and whether it's documentaries or news stories or whatever else, about if there's anything that 9/11 should have taught us, and from an outsider's perspective, certainly the intelligence community, is that who cares who wins? Who cares who gets the credit? The winner is 9/11 never happens again. And what you're kind of telling me is that didn't really change. That motivation that should be right there hasn't changed how that community functions and operates with each other on a day-to-day basis. Am I wrong?
I do. I think you're a little bit off. I think it has changed to a certain extent.
Great.
Not completely, right? Like, I still think ego gets in the way sometimes. But I think in the times leading up to 9/11, I don't think we thought they would attack us. And so the idea of someone transiting here or being here seemed insignificant, if you want me to be completely honest with you, now that we have the benefit of hindsight. I don't think we thought that they were coming here to attack us. It doesn't absolve us of any guilt, of course not, but I just am trying to get into people's heads. Do I think things have gotten better? I do, because the reality is no agency wants to now be the one who like didn't communicate, right? And is like ultimately responsible for something like that again. But I do think that there are still times that ego gets in the way.
So I don't know if you had an opportunity to read it or listen to a podcast or watch a documentary about it. When they killed Osama bin Laden, they obtained the SEALs obtained scores of information there at the compound, right? Recordings, zip drives, flash drives, printouts, all, and they threw it onto trash bags. And over the years, all of it has been read and now put into sort of a digestible form. And what they found was Al Qaeda basically did not think that the United States was going to retaliate the way we did. And the other thing was that Osama bin Laden was planning another attack in some way, shape, or form. Either it was going to be planes, but most likely his target was going to be trains. So all of this is fascinating. But the one thing I came out of it is I'm not sure we're any safer or less vulnerable today in 2023 than we were in 2021 after learning about all this. Do you feel the same way?
Yes and no. And I've said this before, that I think, and again, we did this with 9/11. Sometimes we have a failure of imagination, right? Because that's what a terrorist attack is. No terrorist is going to pick up the phone and say, hello, my name is Osama bin Laden. I'm going to attack trains on the state. Like, that's never going to happen. It didn't even happen with 9/11, right? The biggest piece of information we had was, oh, they might hijack planes. What are we supposed to do with that? The CIA ground every airplane? You can't, right? It's just not going to happen. And so I think yes and no. I think we have a failure of imagination sometimes. Sometimes I do feel like we are too like reactionary, in terms of our policy. I've kind of always felt that way, and that we're not super proactive. But to your point, I 100% agree, just because firsthand that Al Qaeda, I mean, I'll just use this language. I guess you can bleep it out later. It was like, holy shit, like what in the world just happened here? I don't think they thought that we would attack Afghanistan. Like, I really don't think they did. And as aggressively as we did, which is fine with me. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But I do think that terrorism is hard. It's hard to treat and it's hard to fight, because now we are moving away from networks, which is what we have with Al Qaeda, or really even ISIS, quite frankly, and moving into lone rangers of these networks. And that's even harder because it's really a needle in a haystack. So I don't know that we're ever going to be less safe. I don't know that we were even less safe from 9/11, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I hear what you're saying. And as I get older and you lived it, you talk about a failure to be imaginative, because to be imaginative, you have to go to really dark places.
Well, and you also have to have, and I'm not putting this on the American people, but I've said this before. And one of the things I do in my class with my college students who were not even born, which is
I know, right?
a lot to digest. One of the things I do around September 11th is, and this seems like such a monotonous video, but it really drives my point home, is there is CCTV footage of the hijackers going through security at Dulles Airport. And, people are dressed, the TSA equivalents dressed in suits, right? Some people are not even going through the metal detector. They're just walking around it. No one cares. And the students are like, well, I don't understand. Why are there not armed guards? Why are there not? And I said, if we had done that in the days leading up to 9/11, if we had done that, I think the American people would have revolted, because we would not have tolerated that level.
Do you not think so? Do you really not think so? If we had the kind of visible security presence on September 10th, you think people would have revolted at that?
On September 10th, maybe, but we had information towards the end of July that he was looking to hijack airplanes. And first of all, you would have to perhaps ground every airplane, which people wouldn't tolerate,
No
right?
way.
We don't have
No way.
an appetite for that,
Nope.
which I don't blame people either. And then we would have to very quickly figure out some way to now put some kind of federal agents at airports. Like, how's that gonna?
No, you're right.
It's not gonna happen quickly, and pay for that. So we'd have to then cut so it's, you have to think about, I'm not blaming us, I'm just saying that we have to remember the like time frame that we were living in and what would have been accepted.
No, and I think I remember when I went to Paris in 98, I'd never been out of the country before, and I'm in Paris and backpacking, and I see at a train station in Paris these two armed guards carrying semi-automatic weapons. I think they were semi-automatic.
Probably.
And it was totally unnerving. That's
Right.
because I was 24. I think I was 24 years old at the time, but I had never seen that. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy.
And now they just walk through the airport like that. It's totally fine.
Totally.
You know, my 8-year-old is like, what's the big deal? Right. Like
Right.
that's her norm. And so we have to remember that, right? Like what would have been, and what is CIA supposed to recommend when all we have is, hey, bin Laden is chattering about hijacking airplanes. That's all we have. That's all we had. And that daily brief has since been declassified, so you can see it online. And when you look at that information, it's like, okay, yeah, what are we supposed to do with that?
I don't know, like, and that's the part of the problem, like, because if there is a mistake made in the intelligence community,
oh, you're going to know about it.
because it could be dead Americans.
Right.
And if I make a mistake, who cares? I might lose my job.
Well,
But no, I mean, seriously, most people, if they make a mistake, what's really the consequence? What are really the damages? Nothing. Nothing. But if the intelligence community makes a mistake, then it's catastrophic. Which leads me to my next question is, you worked in DC, you worked a part of it, and what do we always say? Anybody over the age of 25, they criticize government agencies, the day is long, right? They're inept, they're incompetent, they're inefficient, they're just bloated bureaucrats who do nothing all day. And yet, the intelligence community, which I think is like 17 agencies, are underneath that umbrella, and they're supposed to be better than all of that. Tell me how that works.
you mean better than?
You've got all these government agencies, Tracy, who get criticized. The day is long, like I said.
So does the CIA, though.
Pardon?
So does the CIA.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, they're part of it, but they're not. But we expect government agencies to make a mistake and to be inefficient. We expect the same government agency, the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, to be completely different than that. I don't know how we rationalize that. And
that's a good point. I don't know. I mean, that's such a good point. I truly don't know, but no one that I worked with or at agencies, even outside of the national security apparatus, were inept and corrupt and did nothing all day. I think we're always judged by our lowest common denominator, right? Yeah. And so, I mean, that's the truth. No, teachers are, yep. Government employees are, police are, and that's where they got somewhere along the line, someone acted that way, right? And so as a result, are there bad apples in truly every single organization, private, public, government, whatever? 1,000%. But that's just not what I ran into, I guess, when I was there. But you're right, like that rationale doesn't really make sense, no, right? It doesn't,
no.
Yeah.
So we've seen in the last 8 to 10 years, Tracy, that the intelligence community, which is supposed to function on its own, right, independent of anything else that's going on in Washington, D.C. or the government, is now being painted with a very stark blue and red brush, right? You work there. Do you think any of these communities and agencies are acting and investigating based on political beliefs?
No, not at all. And that's what's so frustrating, because it's funny, if anything, the people attracted to those types of jobs lean a little on the redder side, right?
Yeah, I could see that.
A little, not too much, but a little. And it's funny because then I'll just be completely transparent. When I started at the CIA, I grew up, 21-year-old from Southern California. And I was, I guess, liberal, right? Like I didn't know anything else. But once I joined the agency, I actually started voting for some Republicans. I voted for
Why?
Bush.
Was it based
Um,
on budgets? Because that's why I always thought is that those agencies in the military based on budgets, and
no,
Republican government, Republican information or government, pardon me, Republican administration will keep the budget get good and big for those kind of agencies and departments.
no.
No,
I voted Republican because I felt that they could handle the terrorism issue better. That's what I felt. Just I'm a very much an issue kind of person. And so I felt at the time that the Bush administration, just because I just felt that Gore's policies, I felt Clinton did a good job. I did start there under Clinton. He did some things I really approved of and some things I didn't approve of. But obviously he wasn't running again. So I felt I was not a fan of some of Gore's policies towards the national security and foreign affairs and some things we were doing in other countries. I felt that Bush would make better decisions in terms of that. And then, it's just for me, it was very much on the issues. And then sometimes I voted for a Democrat again. And then sometimes I voted for a Republican again. So that's what was so interesting about my career there. If anything, it probably moved me more straight to the middle, to be completely honest with you. Um, and at FBI, I would argue that the vast majority of the FBI agents are conservative, but not in a polarizing way. And they're not there to change my mind about things or anything. So I never felt, because you have to remember Bush and Clinton kept the same CIA director. They didn't seem to care that he had spanned two different political parties, right? And so that was what I always thought was so cool. And the same thing with Louis Freeh, who was there at FBI when I was there. He was also straddled two different political, and I always thought that's awesome. That's great. They're kind of showing us, yeah.
so I'm sure you have friends who still work in these agencies. What do they think about now the fact that their agencies are being demonized and caught up in this political process where you have lawmakers, senators, congressmen, congresswomen, the president, maybe even going so far as to say these agencies are being are tethered to a political belief system?
Well, it's why I wrote my book, to be completely honest with
Really?
you.
Was that the
Yeah.
motivation for it?
It was started out really in 2016-ish. When, and I felt bad, for my friends that were still there. And they really are apolitical people. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans, some truly don't care, right? They're kind of all over the place. And I got like viscerally mad because I could not have been farther from what we were doing. And this whole weaponization of the national security apparatus or law enforcement apparatus is really very frustrating to me. Because these people are willing to risk their lives overseas, to protect our country. They don't care, about opening investigations on presidents or whatever just because they want to. Now, look, are there always going, like I said before, are there always going to be people at the FBI and CIA who are problematic and who may do things wrong or incorrectly? Yeah, but it's not indicative of the entirety.
So Tracy, I follow you on social media. That's how I found you. And obviously, a few months ago, big news was that former United States President Donald Trump took a few documents from his days in the White House and put them in his home in Florida, classified, confidential, et cetera. Now, this is obviously a potential major security breach and should have some consequences, I thought, maybe, I don't know. For the record, I don't think anything's going to happen to him, but that's me. Do you think anything will happen to him as a result of what he did?
Yeah, so I think, and I want to be clear because I did say this in social media. I think it's wrong that Pence kept them. I think it's wrong that Biden kept them. And I think it's wrong that Trump kept them. I don't really care what party you are. You need to be keeping them properly. The difference is that both Biden and Pence, Biden and Pence both complied with the investigations that were being done on them, and both returned as many as they could and were very open about what they had done. And so I just want to be clear on that, because if they hadn't, I don't care if it's Biden, Pence, whomever, they'd be in trouble too. But it sounds like both of them were very complicit in terms of investigations and were helpful. The difference is that Trump chose not to comply and willingly retained those documents. And when you do something like that, that in turn begs the question, why?
Yeah, why? And I wondered about that. I mean, I have wondered that, and I understand people make mistakes.
Look, I think Pence and Biden truly made mistakes. I do. I think they both mistakenly took home documents. Is it wrong? 1,000%. But I think because they complied, because they turned them over, because they did everything they could to right their wrong, I'm not saying they deserve a pass, but I get it. With Trump, when you're purposely holding on to these things after, they're subpoenaing you, like, then you have to wonder why. And are you holding them onto them now for nefarious reasons? And I have to be honest, I'm starting to think something may happen just because there's so many investigations going on right now. But part of me thinks that it won't, because it's a former president.
Do you miss it at all? I'm sure that was
sometimes.
Do you?
Of course. Uh-huh.
What about it do you miss?
I really miss my colleagues. I was very close to a lot of them. And I miss just, really being at the heart of foreign affairs, right? And foreign policy. But I don't think I'd go back. I mean, I miss it, but I wouldn't go back.
I read that your book was optioned for television or movie development. Is that correct?
Uh-huh. Yes.
I know those processes can take a while. What can you tell me? Where are you on that? Are we in like the early stages? Are you getting some movement, or is it sort of
well, it could take a while or never, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, right now it's with Netflix, and is with a production company called Wonderland Sound and Productions, who's McG is who owns it. He's the one that did like Charlie's Angels and Terminator. And there's obviously writers and they're working on a script, but I mean, there's writer's strike right now. So I really haven't asked. I kind of stay out of it. I know that sounds terrible, but I know they went on a tour of CIA. I didn't go with them. But I kind of just let them do their thing, and they'll let me know if they need something.
So I'm assuming this is a process. You write the book, you sell the rights to it, you get a check or part of a check.
Yep.
And then that's it.
Yep. That's it.
And if they call you, they call you.
If they call me, great. If they don't,
great. Okay, last thing I'm going to ask you, because I always like asking people in certain professions that are converted a lot into pop culture.
Sure.
Give me a book, give me a movie, or give me a documentary that you would recommend about the intelligence community that is pretty accurate and a pretty good look at what that life is and that profession is like.
That's hard. I'd say movie-wise, Zero Dark 30, probably.
Yeah, that was a good movie. It was a great book. Yeah, that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. Yes.
Right. Tracy, I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mac.
The book is The Unexpected Spy. She's a professor at TCU. Thank you very much, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Tracy.
Bye.